Right, okay, welcome back. This is going to be clip number 6, and today we're going to try and look at how to answer the fieldwork questions when we have got somebody else's fieldwork in front of us. This is the example from last year's exam paper. It was the rivers question, question 9, and as you can see from what's in front of us, we were given some information. It's always worth, I think, reading this very, very carefully, because this is giving us some idea of what these students have actually gone and done. So there's a bit of text to read at the top. Data collected by students studying river gradient changes, 2 different upland areas with contrasting rock types. The students measured gradient, 2 different locations, 2 different streams. They used a geology map. They measured at 8 sites, ranging poles, tape measures, clinometer. The sites were 1 kilometre apart. Site number 1 was upstream, site number 8 was downstream. It's just giving us a bit of context, and they're doing nothing different to what you did. We measured gradient. We started upstream and we worked our way downstream, measuring gradient in exactly the same way. We've then got their table of results. So we can see sites 1 to 8, we can see 2 different locations, and we can see that the 2 different locations were different types of rock. We can then see the results that they got. Okay, I think with a table of data, I'd always try and work out what's happening. The gradient's decreasing. Average gradient's that, average gradient's higher. The gradient here overall is decreasing, but it's kind of going up and down a little bit. It's a lot more variable. Okay, and there's nothing to stop me scribbling all over that. Right, once I've got to grips with the information I've then got 3 questions. Suggest a suitable inquiry question that students could have investigated. In other words, it's saying, what hypothesis could they have come up with in terms of investigation? Now, this is where you've got to sort of connect things within the table. An inquiry question connects 2 variables. So I could talk about how gradient decreased according to different types of rock or geology. I could perhaps talk about how gradient decreased with distance downstream, but I've got to try and connect 2 things together. Okay, just saying gradient decreased is not actually an inquiry question. It decreases with what? What 2 things are you trying to connect together? Inquiry question is just a very fancy way of saying come up with a hypothesis. The next question over here is a fairly standard one. 2 factors that could have been considered when choosing fieldwork locations. So in other words, can I think of 2 ideas, 2 things that I should have thought about when I'm choosing my fieldwork locations? Now this is where you've almost got to sort of apply what you know. We went through why we chose our sites when we looked at both rivers and urban, and any site location has got to sort of be approached from 2 sort of aspects really. There is the logistical aspect, so I could include an idea about health and safety, whether the site was accessible, whether it was easy for the pupils to get into the stream, it can't have been too deep or too shallow. You know, you could approach that question with an idea that's related to logistics of fieldwork and health and safety. Your second way of approaching the sites and locations question might well be that what you've got to think about here is, was it good from a geographical point of view? So there's some clues here. They started upstream and they worked their way downstream. That seems to make sense to me. Their sites were 1 kilometre apart, so they're collecting a range of data at 2 different places, and they're using a kind of systematic sampling method. They've considered that in their location. Okay, now there are loads and loads of other answers you could apply here, but think about why we chose. I mean, distance is an obvious one. You know, can the children and the staff actually get there in a day or not, and be able to have time to collect some data? Is it close enough in terms of distance to school to be able to travel there? These are all things you've got to consider. Do not, though, however, put in the weather. The weather is not a consideration when we're choosing fieldwork sites. The weather is something that could alter our results. It is not something we think about when we choose our fieldwork sites. The last question using somebody else's fieldwork information I think is incredibly easy. Describe the results of the fieldwork shown in figure 9. It's almost like a skills question. In fact, it is a skills question. What are their results saying? Gradient increases at site number 1 to site number 8 by overall 4 degrees. Okay, the average gradient is different, quote data. The second location, quote data, overall it increases, but it shows things that don't quite fit the pattern or anomalies. You're basically trying to analyse those students' results. Okay, 4 marks, you must quote data in your answer. Now the urban one, question 10, was different. This time they'd switched it round, so what you'd actually got here was somebody else's fieldwork, but this time they wanted 8 marks out of it, so it's an extended bit of writing, but it does follow a similar format. There is some information to read. Remember, they've done exactly the same thing as you. Quality of life, how and why does it vary in different urban areas? So there's some information about the students have gone out, asked questionnaires, 40 at random. So it's telling us, random sampling, 40 questionnaires. They compared the results with a similar survey done a couple of years before with another random 40 people. Now, automatically, as a piece of fieldwork, I'm thinking, was 40 questionnaires enough? Should they have asked some more? They've only gone out once to ask these questionnaires, so it's going to be very limited. They've only really asked them to grade or select 3 problems out of a list. They've then compared these results with 40 completely different people that they asked 3 years ago. They've then graphed the information, so they've got a data presentation information there. Okay, so I'm kind of trying to think of that as a geographer and then sort of think of the good points and bad points of what they've done. And that's all I've been presented with. Anyway, what I've actually got to do, the students have come to the conclusion that social, economic and environmental conditions in the area have improved since 2014. Assess the evidence for this conclusion. I've got to use geographical skills to be able to find evidence from here that supports their conclusion, quote data, evidence from here that doesn't support their conclusion, quote data, and try and analyse and try and think about why. But there's also information in the text that is giving me some very, very big clues as to why this may not have been the best conclusion to come to. Assess the evidence. Well, that's the only evidence I've got. Surely, if I was going to come to that kind of conclusion, I'd have looked at, as a piece of research, more than a few questionnaires. Where's the secondary data? Where's the qualitative data? To come to a full conclusion, I've got to have looked at everything. And that's where on this question, there are 4 marks for skills and there's 4 marks for application. And it is applying what I know a good piece of fieldwork looks like to this scenario. Okay, I've got to think about paragraphs and I've got to think about coming to a conclusion, but this is what the question is requiring of me. I know what a piece of good fieldwork should look like, hopefully. Is that a good piece of fieldwork? Can from that they come to that conclusion? Well, personally, I don't see how they can. Really, even the graph contradicts itself before we go into problems with method. Okay, and then other wider areas about lack of qualitative data, where's the secondary data, where's other bits of quantitative data that they may have gathered. Okay, but that's how you've got to think. Anyway, next clip, we'll look at our own fieldwork.